This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting-edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. It's Alexa Linton here, and you're here for the Whole Horse Podcast. And today is episode 53. I'm recording lots of podcasts lately, and they're coming out every Friday. So keep your eyes out. You can subscribe on iTunes as well if you want immediate news of when episodes are released. Today on the podcast, I have someone that I have been following for a while on social media and loving her posts and sharing a lot of her posts. Tammy, thank you for being here today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. We were chatting just a little bit before we got on today, and I knew we were kindred geeky spirits together.
A good way to put it.
We just immediately dove into fascia and osteopathy, and I'm really excited to be able to sit down with you today and chat more about your journey and what you do with horses, and yeah, where you're going with things as well. So yeah, thank you for being here.
It's good to be here.
Awesome. So I want to just start, Tammy, by getting a little bit more of your story, how you started down this path and you know got to where you are now, which is as you shared, starting a little bit of a journey into osteopathy at the Vluggen Institute, which is pretty exciting, a little bit of a pipe dream of mine. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your journey with horses, Tammy, and what got you started and what got you here?
Wow. I think the disease of horses started when I was 3.
Yep.
I was born in Switzerland, and I think my mom took me to the circus, and they had the pony rides, and all the kids screamed when you put them on, and I screamed when you took me off. And I think that was the start of it. And I'd done horses for a very long time. You know, growing up, I used to joust when I was in university for beer, money, and fun. And then, I got married, had kids, less time. When my kids were, I have twins, and when they were about 3, I kind of started to look for places with horses again. We traveled a lot, and when we came to the US, I met up with a whole bunch of endurance people, which is something that was very foreign to me. And they took me out on these crazy rides that were crazier than hunt rides. And I kind of got reintroduced back into the horse world, wound up with a horse that was distinctly misunderstood and fairly mistreated. I remember, I can't remember if I had the book first or Jim Masterson came to the barn, and I kind of watched, and went, I could maybe do that. I could play with that. Got some results, went and did the weekend, then did the 5-day, was tinkering on all the people's horses. A lot of the endurance riders were part of the Olympic US team and highly competitive, and so they were more than happy for me to tinker with their horses. And, I got to the point where they're like, we really can't keep paying you in wine and chocolate and things like that. So, and then once I finished the Masterson Method, I felt like I needed more tools.
Yep.
And that's how I found Dr. Sandra Howlett with Experience Equests, who teaches craniosacral through the Upledger Institute. And I went, the first class was in California, and I remember there was a whole bunch of human craniosacral therapists. Now, I'm not a fan of touching people or people touching me. So my concept of therapy was very slim. And so I love touching horses. And so, they were all talking about this rhythm and they were feeling it. I'm like, I don't know what they're smoking, but I didn't get any. And Sandy, who's an awesome teacher and very intuitive, was like, well, it's kind of hard to feel it when you're riding it, because for me, tissue has always moved. I just didn't attribute it to that. And so once I kind of got over the hurdle that I really shouldn't try so hard because it was already happening for me, I kind of ran with that. I did all 4 modules, and every time I help out as a TA, I learn stuff again. And I think as we learn, we're not always ready to hear what is being taught because our brain isn't there. And so when you hear it for the 10th time and other pieces have fallen into place, all of a sudden you're like, oh. And I normally turn around to her and I go, you never said that. She goes, yes, I did. So, and she kind of set the ball rolling, where I realized that you really need to know more anatomy and understand the physiology and understand how the body works in order to really be effective as a therapist. And I understood more and more that, what we're looking at or what we are treating is really the result rather than the cause. And I spent a lot of time self-educating and reading and falling down rabbit holes trying to get education in terms of anatomy and how things work and biomechanics. And, as much as you invest time, I felt like there were holes. And I had a couple of people that had gone through the Vluggen Institute, and I was like, I don't know, because it's a very different modality to craniosacral, although, craniosacral is part of osteopathy. Fascial work is part of osteopathy. And I was like, okay, I heard so many good things that I was like, okay, I'm going to go there and give it a try. And I've only done 1 module and it did not disappoint. It's a different way of moving around the horse. I might be fit by the time I'm done with this. It's a lot more movement than I'm used to. But it's been fun, and it's just, I love learning. The more I learn, the more I realize I don't know, the more I want to learn. So that's how we got to where we are now. A lot of people have asked me why I share the information that I have, or why I put it all out there for free. And I think the easiest way to explain it is I have ADD and dyslexia, and for me, when I treat horses, it's a reciprocal thing. And so when I go out to a lot of barns, I see a lot of horses that are really quite uncomfortable and are really trying their best for their owners. And so my concept is always, if I can bring awareness to every horse person to just have a quick look at their horse and go, wow, maybe there's a little bit of a problem. Maybe we're challenged here because of a physiological issue as opposed to a behavioral issue. Injecting hawks isn't going to fix everything. Then that is kind of my drive. How many horses can I change their life today by somebody reading this and going, oh, maybe I need to get help?
Yeah.
So that's the driving force.
Yeah, I get that driving force. I have a similar one. So yeah. Because I really feel that education, is so key. Most
and it's simple. I make it all very simple. I try to not go too deep into the anatomy or too deep into how the neurology works. I really try and simplify it and make it concise so that people can, because nobody wants to read a 5-page essay. Well, I do, but most people don't. Right?
Yes.
So, they want to look at the picture, look at the little blurb of words and go, okay, I get that. So if I look at my horse, I might see that. What can I do for my horse?
Yeah. I love that. And so there's been various different ones that I've seen that I've so enjoyed. There was one on the TMJ the other day with some sample, some exercises that you're sharing. And I've also seen this amazing
I don't know what you call him, but your little horse that you put all the muscle lines on.
Basil. Yeah, he's
Basil.
from Anatomy in Clay.
Yes.
And I call all my bones after things that remind me of things. So I grew up in England, and there was Fawlty Towers, and so he's named after Basil from Fawlty Towers. Okay, so just to give you the context.
Yep.
And he's helped me learn a lot, because when you have to shape the muscle and kind of layer them and put them all together into the anchor point, you're like, wow, that's a lot of pull on that point. It really changes your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I know I'd love to chat about today, because it's, it's interesting for me as a fourth year student of human osteopathy, and then, doing equine sport therapy, but a while back. And, there's, lots of pieces that I sort of, at that point when I did my equine sport therapy work, there wasn't a lot of talk about fascia and fascial lines and the influence of those. And so when I saw those pictures that you were sharing, I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is someone that can help me understand like the ventral and dorsal and, cross chains in horses, like how this stuff works, what are the fascial chains like?
Right.
Yeah. And I would love if you were open to sharing a little bit more about that concept, or if that's something that you sort of believe in, the sense of things being connected all the way through the body.
Well, I think the way that I would term it was, for a long time, I felt when I would treat a horse that I was playing whack-a-mole.
Yes.
So something would slide in and give, and all of a sudden we'd have motion, and I'd go back to the hind end, and I'd be like, well, okay, that didn't work, because now we've popped out here. And so there was a lot of concept of that. And when I touch, a lot of times I feel like there's a thread, like I can see this kind of runway lights thread that goes through the body, and it would take me in weird places where I was like, how is that connected? And bear in mind that at the time my knowledge of anatomy was smaller than it is now, which is nowhere near where it needs to be in order to get the full picture even now. But as you learn, you kind of start putting things together. And I would touch a horse or treat a horse and come back to the house and go, okay, I got to look at the book and see what is there and what is there and why is it taking me there. And as my hands got smarter, I also realized that there's different layers that you sink into, right? And I used to have a lot of conversations with Sandy where I'd say to her, I feel like a bull in a china shop. Like, I can tell I have layers of tissue in my hand, but I can't differentiate.
Yep.
And so, and the pull would be in different directions. So if you're talking about stacking tissue, I would try and follow it, and I'd wound up being like this possessed fly in a bottle going, where am I going? Where am I going?
It sounds like it sounds like fascia to me.
Yes. And so,
if I was going to say what tissue you were on.
Right. And so the more I played with that, the more I would be like, okay, well, can we differentiate where the different layers in terms of depth go and which way are they going? And then Pamela Eckelberger, who has the osteology, she does the Equasuma osteology.
Okay.
I don't know if you know her.
I don't actually.
She originally did this little booklet, which is awesome. If you go on her site, you can get it from her, which is a very basic kind of showing of the fascial lines. And I can send you the links later.
That'd be great.
And so that was kind of where I started. And then I was looking at that, and it was hard for me to see everything. It's a really good basic overview. It gives you kind of the meat and potatoes. But I go down rabbit holes. So I actually looked at the article that she based it on, which is, by Dr. Elbrond and Dr. Schultz, which is myofascia, the unexplored tissue.
Ooh, I want to see that too.
Yeah, and it's for horses, and it's absolutely awesome. And it's really hard to read. Even if you know anatomy, it's, I read it the first time, I'm like, okay, it might as well be Chinese. So I had to kind of translate it and go slow and figure out how it's all connected. And, again, as we were talking earlier, pieces of the puzzle kind of fell in and I went, oh, that explains a lot. And, the more I started reading that, the more I started following the anatomy. Well, once you follow the anatomy and, you've seen the lines that I draw, and I think then I realized that there's a problem with that because people assume it's just like toilet paper. It's this flat kind of line, which it really isn't.
Not at all. No.
Right? It's a bag and everything is double bagged. And I'm still trying to wrestle with the idea of how it all works and how do you explain it and how do they even figure out where to cut and dissect. So,
oh my gosh, right? And especially when you're going between, like, say, the fascia, like peritoneum that surrounds viscera as opposed to, around muscle or tendon or bone.
Right. And, and then you look at fascia, which if you think about it, the superficial splits 3 times and then it splits 3 times again. So does the medial and so does the deep, right? And so you kind of go, okay, this is where I get to that point where I feel like I have oven mittens on and I'm trying to thread a needle.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
And, I look at people like Dr. Sandra Howlett, who has the most exquisite feel where she can tell you exactly what nerve she's on and where she's going and what ganglion she's going for.
Oh my God.
Yeah, no.
Pipe dreams. One day.
But
what do they say about osteopathy, where my teachers always say, you'll get through this school and then you'll be somewhat adequate at treating.
Well, it's really interesting because I went to the module 1 at the Vluggen Institute, and Yannick is very fluid when he does stuff. And then you go home and you practice. And it's really funny because my friend whose horses I've been practicing on, she goes, you look really good. And I went, no. And I showed her a little bit of what he does. And she goes, yeah, you suck.
Yeah, right. In comparison.
It's this kind of efficiency of movement.
Oh, yeah.
And I for me also, it's the hardest thing is the body coordination for me and the horse, because it's so different to what I've done until now.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure all of that out. And then you have to feel, right? In addition to all that going on, you then have to feel. And that takes years of practice. And what he said to us was, this is how you do it, but you're going to have to go home and figure out how you do it.
Yes.
And, that's being really interesting because it really is a play of figuring out how you as a therapist need to use your body in order to facilitate what you're trying to get the other body to do.
Oh, big time. And I know in our work with humans, a huge part of the work is like taking care of us as a therapist, right? So am I biomechanically correct so I can actually be effective in what I'm, doing in this session, right? And
right,
not sacrificing our own bodies for the cause, Yeah, so I can imagine that comes in big time into play doing the osteopathy work with horses.
Right. Well, I think it does with any kind of therapy that you do, because even though, it's not energy work, because it's kind of hard, is it energy work? Is it not? It is to an extent. The fact is that you give of yourself in order to help somebody else heal.
Yes, totally.
Regardless of how you look at it. And some days you are better at guarding the difference between your bubble and their bubble, and some days not. So it just depends on how well you're able to ground yourself on that particular day. And we're all human and we have all that baggage. So some days it's harder.
Big time. Yeah, some days it's harder. So going back to the fascial lines, what have you discovered? Are you now thinking of like distinct lines, or is it more fluid than that?
So I think the biggest things for me is how it's almost beautiful how all the fascial lines, especially the superficial ones from all 4 feet, wind up in the TMJ and occiput atlas. So all roads lead to Rome, and Rome is the TMJ.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to me to actually see that the hind feet were actually more fascially connected to the TMJ than the front feet. That really changed a lot of the concept of how I think. It was amazing when you follow the journey of, what the fascia encapsulates. So if you think of like the ventral line, I always thought in terms of hyoid to and the pubic tendon and to the pubic bone.
Yeah.
Well, no, we're talking, P3 all the way, into the tendon, into that reciprocal mechanism, into the tendons of the patella.
Right.
Like really tightly into those, into your coxofemoral joint.
It.
Over.
So it's coming up through the leg.
Yes, into
all
the
way up.
coxofemoral joint, down that kind of from the pubic tendon and the linea alba all the way, and it catches some of those caudal ribs.
I was gonna say, totally.
And it's this big kind of sheet that kind of comes round the outside and the bottom and goes into that sternum, and then up all those hyoid muscles and sternomandibular muscles. But it doesn't end there, because it goes all the way into the TMJ and into that.
Well, especially in horses.
Nuca and occipital
totally.
condyles. So it really, you think about changing the angle of the hind foot and that kind of pull that it would do. And I've been very blessed to work with Monique Craig at Epona Shoes, who's given me an earful of education in all the best ways about how the feet should be and what the angle should be. And they're big into the science and taking x-rays and measuring and really seeing, what the angle of the foot should be. And so when you start learning that and you relate that to the tissue, and then you think about the digital cushion that is all fascia, right? And you think about where those fascial lines connect, and they always connect in the pasterns. So basically, we always think of P3 as the proprioception, but is it not higher up? So is the fetlock really the area of proprioception? Because that's kind of where those fascial lines connect.
Yes.
Over the annular ligament. And so, it kind of changes the way you think of how a horse moves. And for me, it's really important, when I talk to farriers a lot of times, I'm like, you have to understand a horse is like a blind person reading a book by Braille. Their feet are their fingertips. Now, if they've got long nails, chapped fingertips, they're only using one area, like the flat bit, they're going to have less proprioception. They're going to have less concept of where their feet are on the ground. And so, when you start connecting all of that through the body and everything it captures through, it's amazing. Living things are amazing machines. If you look at it in terms of engineering, it's quite spectacular.
It is. And I love that new understanding of the ventral line. So the dorsal line would come up.
The dorsal line comes up sort of, if you want, the back end of the leg. For those that are listening without all the anatomy terms, all the way through those tendons to the hook. And then it goes in between all those big hind end locomotion muscles. And then it goes in through those ligaments within the pelvis that suspend the sacrum. And it runs along the top in between the multifidus and all those kind of spinal erector muscles. And then it goes all the way up the cervicals, and it catches the trapezius, I think, and the rhomboid and all that kind of nuchal ligament, and goes all the way to the top of the occiput and then down to the TMJ.
Okay, so it goes, up the nuchal. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So all of that kind of, and I'll share the link to where you can get the article.
Oh, please do. Yes.
And it really is, after you've decoded it,
Yes.
it's a fascinating read. I kind of focused first on those superficial lines, so like the dorsal and ventral line, and then the front limb protraction and retraction line. Tried to kind of get the basic of that before, because once you get into the, there is a spiral line and there is a functional line. Once you get into those, and they kind of zigzag and cross over and go under and over in a spiral kind of way, a little like fascia that coils in and then unsprings.
Yes.
And once you start following that, you're like, okay, now I'm totally lost.
Yeah, that sounds, I have never even heard or thought of that. So I'm just loving, I'm very excited to see some more visuals of that. And I know in humans, we tend to have like what we call cross chains. Is that something that happens in horses as well?
What do you mean by cross chains?
So in human osteopathy, we often talk about this idea of the fascial lines having like a dorsal and ventral line, but also like chains that sort of cross from one side to the other.
Yeah, so like the spiral line, you mean like crossovers? Yes.
They cross over, yeah.
They have the spiral line, and I think that does 2 on the top and 1 on the bottom. I can't remember off heart because I haven't spent so much time studying that yet. That's next on my list of things to look at. But it does cross over. If you look at a lot of times there's those images of the horses with the fascial line. There's one that looks like a zigzag that does X's on the horse. That would be like that. And it kind of it's what does the diagonals in the limbs, I think, to some extent, and it kind of spirals around the body, and it catches, let's say the left scapula and the right hook, and reciprocal kind of mechanism in the whole thing, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah,
well, that's how the body works together, right?
Exactly. And I mean, most of us as riders, even if we don't know the anatomy, we know that like the left front impacts the right hind and the right front impacts the left hind and vice versa. We know that part because, we've seen it, often. So, yeah. So this is just another way of understanding how that works. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think, for me, it's always important for people to keep in mind that, we're just as crooked as the horses.
Oh my gosh.
Everything that, everything that we are talking about in terms of the horse being, having fascial pull and trying to compensate for whatever might be stuck in their body, it's the same for humans. And unfortunately, a lot of times the horses mirror the human, or the human mirrors the horse. I'm not sure which way it goes. And then, all that is translated through some buffer that doesn't always fit. And then we're trying to do dressage, or we're trying to move forward in a, and I always laugh because I look a lot at dressage and I'm like, people, you do understand these are war moves. You can't be holding your horse in your hands if you're trying to slash with your sword.
Yeah.
And so that whole concept of fluidity and airless tension, all of that. There's so much to think about. You kind of sit there sometimes and go, okay, I've spent the whole day studying, but I'm no further ahead. I just have more questions.
Right? The deeper rabbit hole. You are the perfect osteopathy student, by the way, because we are the we're all about rabbit holes. I think in this work, because it's like there's just never, it's never ending. There's always something more to kind of understand, or a depth to understand about it. So, yeah. And I see it in my riders when they come in all the time. And I'm like, how do you ride your horse? Your pelvis literally doesn't move. What is happening?
It's interesting that the other, if you want, juxtaposition here is that you have humans generally don't have great body awareness.
No.
And horses have supreme body awareness. Now you throw that in the mix and it totally rearranges things even more.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And you know what horses, you know, I'm sure you see this as well, whereas like, you know, what horses have to adapt to continue to do anything, right? Especially under saddle. There's
Right.
just, you know, I think us as body workers, we end up seeing the compensations that come out of that efforting in our horses.
Right. And, you know, I think this is something I'm learning as well. And it's been kind of a learning process over the last year, probably. And it was funny because it was validated when I went for my first osteopathy training, is we always think we want to come in and, you know, help everything. We're going to facilitate change in everything and bring the horse back to balance. Well, sometimes you can't do all that at once, and you really need to take your time so that the body can adjust.
Yep.
You can't go in and go, okay, you don't need that. You don't need that. You know, the body has put these things in place to try and protect itself and cope. And so if we come in and blow it all out of the water, we're not necessarily doing the horse any favors. And so I think, you know, a lot of times I talk to my clients and I say, you know, we have to take it slow here. We can't change everything all at once.
Yeah.
And, you know, fascia, sometimes, you know, that's the beauty of it. If you really release somewhere, it kind of changes everything. You know, the recoil effect is so big throughout that it really allows for other things to go, oh, wait, I got a little more wiggle room, and do it in a more natural way.
Yeah. And I love that feeling when, you know, you're really in tune with the body, and you really know where to release first, or you really get that sense of, okay, this is the spot I need to release first, and everything else just kind of unwinds because of that, you know, or a lot of the other things sort of take care of themselves from there.
That's, you know, something I think that any therapist is always working for is, you know, finding that center of the spider's web.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and a lot of times it's hard to find because, you know, horses, we all compensate, and that's normal, but horses are compensating for compensation. And that's where it starts to get a little tricky.
Yes, absolutely.
So, you know, the body is supposed to be able to pick up slack in certain areas if something is not working properly. But by the time that a horse is visibly uncomfortable, you know, it's out of options. So how many layers of compensation are we talking about here?
Generally a lot, from my experience. Oh yeah. By that point, yes. Yeah. And you know, a lot of rigidity often as well within the system.
Well, again, going back to fascia, you know, because it's all interconnected. So even if you want to go from osteopathy, so if you have a segment or a area that is not moving, right, it's surrounded by fascia and it has things that relate to that area. Well, okay, so anywhere in that area, that could be where there are restrictions, but that area has neighbors and they have fascia, and the fascia is going, well, I don't have any give, so I'm going to hold down here, and I'm going to hold down here, and I'm going to hold down here. So if a horse, let's take an example. If a horse is not breathing correctly because it has a funny girth or a bad saddle or whatever, right? You know, yeah, the diaphragm and the ribs are going to get contracted and they're going to get maybe a little stuck, but the liver is stuck behind the diaphragm. So is the liver going to have less motion? If that has less motion, will the gut have less motion? Does that now mean that the horse is going to clamp its ass all the way and have no hind end motion? You know, it's this kind of yes, but, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you
this
know,
is where it comes back to the whack-a-mole, right? So you release that, and you come back and you go, well, wait, why is that back there?
and also, potentially things sort of maybe I notice for myself in my hands, sometimes things will start to unwind when I get that kind of, like you were kind of joking before about the chicken and the egg,
Right.
and it's about finding the rooster, that sense of sometimes you'll get that, that sweet spot that does start to,
And part of what I did with the few simple things that I put out, they were really, things to relax the horse and the person, but ears are huge for that sweet spot, and I had a few texts from people that have said to me, oh my God, my horse absolutely loved it. It was yawning away. And,
great.
Most people might not understand in terms of neurology what it means, and it doesn't really matter for the average person who wants to help their horse. But that sort of, work with the ears, releasing that pole and those temples and releasing that TMJ is a really sweet spot. And it's so simple to do. That's why I shared those things, because it really was something really simple that is quite effective without you knowing what you're doing. And would be nice for the horses that are probably just as frustrated as the people that they're not doing anything or going anywhere.
Oh yes, I've been working on a few of those the last few days at a distance. Just they're like, I'm so bored right now. there's some of the ones at the full board stables that are used to being ridden, 4 or 5 times a week, right? So
yeah, and it's not healthy for them to do all the standing around, just like it's not healthy for us to do all the sitting around.
No.
So now I'm hoping, my one hope with this stay at home coronavirus thing is that maybe people will look at their horse a little differently. Basically they live like we're living right now, only in a smaller space, and they get to go out an hour a day, and we expect them to behave and pay attention to us and do whatever, and then we put them back in space. Well, in about a week from now, all of us need to examine how we feel, and then go look at our horse and say, thank you for not killing me.
Yes, I fully concur. Yeah. Yeah, because we're not used to this, like, oh my gosh, I got that again. That's so strange. Um, yeah, the crazy crashing thing. Yeah, we're not used to the experience of being cooped up, like, and we can't go out and dissipate that energy whenever we feel like it.
Right.
In whatever way we feel like. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but
it's an interesting, I think a lot of times when I treat horses and clients are like, well, I don't get it, I'll try and put their body in a certain way, or I'll tell them, all right, I want you to clench your ass, bend over like this, and now I want you to try and run. They're like, I can't. I go, that's the point. So I think, empathy comes from experience.
Oh, big time.
I think horses are really spectacular in allowing humans to do almost anything to them, and they are way kinder than we give them credit for. And somebody, a friend of mine, shared this article about what the average horse has to endure in its life. It did the rounds on Facebook, and what it has to put up with, in terms of being in a tiny box 23 hours a day, changing homes, meeting new people, having the same food all the time, having ill-fitting tack, maybe feet that don't work, pain somewhere in the body. And with all of those really limiting constraints, still had to be intelligent, well-behaved, and nice to the new person that they met.
Yep.
And so, if you think about all that, it really changes how you view them.
So it's been so interesting here on this little recording. We've been having some very interesting technical difficulties. So, but we're here now. We can hear each other, and so glad, because it's been such an amazing conversation. And before we finish up today, I wanted to chat a little bit more, Tammy, about, because I just love the work you're doing with the TMJ, and it's an area of fascination for me as well. So I'd love to just chat a little bit more about that before we get into closing off our time together today.
Sure. So I guess what's important to understand, and recently I've found out more about this through my study of osteopathy. I always used to think the TMJ is the most important joint, but the teeth have a lot to do with it as well. But really, for horses, their TMJ is the center of, and I think for people as well, I don't know enough about human anatomy, it's the center of proprioception, it's the center of sensory input, it's what allows us to, kind of keep our balance and know where we are in space. And so, for a lot of horses, what I noticed the more I worked on horses is that almost all of them have unbalanced TMJs, meaning, one eye or one temporal bone is higher up, further back, further forward. And, that in turn would affect the sphenoid, which is the central or the keystone bone in the skull. Mm-hmm. Which means all their proprioception is wrong. Now, the body's main thing, other than staying alive, is to maintain that equilibrium and balance. And so the moment those temporal bones are off, the body is going to do whatever it needs to do in order to rebalance them. Yep. So essentially, if your horse has TMJs that are off or eyes that are not pointing in the same direction, it's going to be crooked somehow.
Yep.
In order for everything to be recalibrated. And so that got me down that rabbit hole. And, once you learn neurology, which I did from Dr. Sandra Howlett through the craniosacral, about how important those internal membranes are in terms of,
mm-hmm.
The three forks and the tentorium and the innervation. And then you start looking at the vagosympathetic trunk and
yep.
all that implies with it, and you really understand that whatever is going on with the horse really started there.
Yeah.
And then we look at the basic of what happens to a horse when the teeth are filed, and how they sling them up and they open their mouth and they're like drugged and they're hanging. Well, that's not how their jaw is hanging when their head is in neutral and their teeth meet.
Yep.
And so what is that then doing to those bones and to the way the horse chews, and how is that affecting the rest of the body?
Mm-hmm.
So and then how is that affecting digestion? One of the big ahas for me in this first module was that digestion starts in the mouth, and if none of the horses are chewing properly, then what does that mean for all the horses out there?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so that's a huge thing. If you think about all the innervation that comes out of there that's supposed to send information to the rest of the body in various ways, that's huge. And if you look at the way that the joint is shaped with that dorsal and ventral component and this kind of, it's a very weird seesaw joint,
yep.
Then you understand how much more important that mobility is. And I tell people all the time, like, look at your horse's kind of where the temporal muscles are,
yep.
and look to see how the top of the mandible is moving more in one side than it is in the other. You can see it in that hollow above their
yep.
eyes. And I say to them, that is what's happening up there, but it has impact throughout the whole body, and you can follow that. And for me, really, the passion is for people to learn to be more observant of their horse and of themselves, so that they can identify where the issues are, so that they can support the horse, support themselves, and in turn have, better results while riding.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that throwing a bit in this equation gets real interesting.
Well, we're not even going to go.
I think that's too much of a can to open right at this moment.
I don't have spectacular equitation by any means. But, and I've often been accused of having the spaghetti reins and not supporting the horse. And for me, I really don't interact with that. I met a pole at 13 from a horse and have trigeminal neuralgia myself. So I get that continuous sneezing, which of course now I have to hide because everybody thinks I have corona. I get that continuous sneezing and the runny nose and the shooting pain through the head. And so I relate to that. And going to the dentist is traumatic because once they ding one tooth, it's like this traveling pain throughout the whole mouth. And so for me, I've often been given horses with a bit to ride. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just, I sort of hold on to the reins, but I ride with my seat.
Yep.
And so, bits is a whole can of worms.
Yeah. Another time.
Right.
Perhaps we can.
And, they're necessary, but a lot of times what people think is a soft bit is actually a harsher bit than it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, once you, with all these pieces we've talked about, once you add equipment onto that, especially like you said, when it's ill-fitting, there's a lot there, like you shared earlier, our horses are very forgiving, sweet-natured creatures to put up with us for the most part.
We take a lot for granted. Like for me, it's fascinating. My mare lost her sight, which is why I eventually had to send her over the rainbow. But we all assume that horses can see. Yet the more I treat horses, the more I realize that they have vision impairment just like people.
Yeah.
And so we get angry that they're spooking and misbehaving, but maybe they just can't rotate their eye that far.
Yes.
Maybe they can't see.
Yep.
And so, it's always an interesting concept when I try and explain to people that you need to think a little beyond what's right in front of your nose.
Yeah. Open your vision a little bit. Pardon the pun, but yes. Yeah, for sure. I've often thought actually that my mare has had vision impairments for, not anything crazy, but enough that she'll be more spooky than most, and a little bit more.
Look at it in the simple way of physiology, right? So because my face met a pole, my left eye has a cataract in it. My right eye doesn't.
Totally.
Right? Just impact damage. So horses smack their faces on stuff all the time.
Yes.
Right. And so, if you have a horse with uneven TMJs and that sphenoid has moved, well, now the optic nerve is going to have different tension on it.
Yep.
Right. So you're going to have a bulgy eye and a sucked in eye, or, two bulgy eyes. And, if you think about horses with Cushing's, sometimes I just need to look at a horse and their eyes are bugging out of their head. And you're like, I think we have to check the cushions there.
Yes. Pituitary. Yep.
So it's, that changes. If you think about an eye that has a lot of pressure or a lot of tension on it, it changes the ability for it to rotate and move.
Absolutely.
Right? Just that would impair the vision, let alone, that I'm sure they're just like us. Some people see better than others.
Yes, completely. Or, how many times have you seen a horse that's got something in their eye and it's been there for, a little while, or, there's lots of things that can go on. I always think of dura as well. I think of the cranial membranes and the pole,
right.
And I've met a few horses that are like, dude, I have a headache. You need to help me with this.
Most horses have a headache.
Right.
It's, and somebody asked me, one of my clients, say, how do you know if the eyeball needs releasing? I'm like, well, if a horse lets you hold their eyeball, it needs releasing.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not going to let you hold it otherwise.
Totally. Yeah, you'll know. That's awesome. Yeah, and I know for myself, sometimes if I'm really tense, I'll put my fingers on my eyes. I just want to let go of tension there for some reason. It feels really nice. So I'm sure horses that do that, they're pretty happy about releasing some inner tension and residual tension in the cranium. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Which
great.
they're not able to do, right? So
Nope.
what they'll do is they'll smack their face against something, trying to rub the eyeball,
Yeah,
which will only make it worse.
totally. Yes. Yeah, for sure. All right. So on that note, we're going to start to close up today, but definitely um, you need to go and see Tammy's Facebook, especially. And I know you probably have resources other places as well, Tammy. So can you tell us a little bit about um, how one gets a hold of some of these amazing resources that you share, these
Well,
free
I
resources?
share everything on my Facebook page.
Yep.
It's an easy way for me to go, I've had 20 questions about this over the last week, so we're going to write something about it.
Yep.
Draw an image, because I went to art school, so that's how I learn as well. Draw an image, put it up there and go, here's the answer, have a look at it. So I think that's probably the best place to find resources and to contact me. And I'm pretty good about getting back within 24 hours. I always tell people I can't really help you do anything for your horse without touching it. So I can maybe recommend there's closed circles for the craniosacral, closed circles for the osteopath, closed circles for the Masterson, where I can say, hey, I can maybe recommend somebody in your area.
Yeah.
And that's always a helpful resource, I think, is to
Totally.
be able to say, hey, do you know anybody in my area?
Yeah, for sure. For
And
sure.
if I do, I'm more than happy. I'm like, the moment somebody wants to get help for their horse, I don't have any of that, oh, I'll come even though I'm not there. I'm happy to share and have everybody get help for their horse all the time.
Awesome. So how do they access your resource or your Facebook page?
They can go on Tami Elkayam Equine Bodywork or Elkayam Equine Therapy if you don't want to see everything else I do in my life.
Perfect.
It's just a little more concise there. It's just the educational posts as opposed to all the other fluff and buff that happens. I would encourage, people always ask me, what are good anatomy books?
Yes.
I had a lot of that over the last couple of days. So the ABC of the Horse Atlas is awesome. You can get it on Amazon. Anatomy of the Horse, Budras, is my go-to almost every time.
Okay.
Other things to look up. If you're interested in learning craniosacral, there's a lot of people out there teaching it. If you're interested in the science, like the real thing and how it works, you could go to the Upledger Institute, or you can directly contact Dr. Sandra Halle on experienceequests.com, I think it is. You can find it on Google. What else? If you want to study osteopathy, so far I'm super impressed with what I learned at the Vluggen Institute.
Great.
I also think it's the only place in the US where you can actually study equine osteopathy.
Yes. Yeah.
What else? If you want to start small and just, find something that is effective and simple, you could start at the Masterson Method.
Yes. Yeah.
It really is. Jim's done a wonderful job of making it really accessible and simple.
Yes. Yeah. I really like that about that work. Yeah.
And then I think the biggest thing I would say to people is when you see something that you think is weird, acknowledge that. I think as horse owners, a lot of times they're very limited to the veterinarian who's short on time and is just trying to patch things and put them together and move on to the next horse because they have to drive there. And, the farrier who's just, again, trying to get his job down, not piss off the veterinarian and try and explain to you very complex things in simple ways. And so they're kind of limited in resources, but I really encourage people to say, if you feel there is something wrong with your horse, there probably is.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest. If somebody said to me, what's the one thing that you'd want to convey to all horse owners? If you think there's something wrong with your horse, there probably is. Even if the vet can't find it and the farrier can't find it, it doesn't matter. There probably is.
Yeah.
Because it's just like mom knows the kids best. You spend the time with them, and when something has changed, that is your first indicator that there is a problem.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so simple, but so important.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Other resources, I can't think of any right now. Well, we had, I will share the link with you, and maybe you could put it up, which is the article of the myofascia, the unexplored tissue, fascial kinetic lines in a horse, by Dr. Elbrond and Dr. Schultz. And you can find it online, but I'll share it with you anyway, and then people can have a go at reading it, which is going to take up a fair amount of time.
Yeah, you can have a go. Bite-sized pieces.
Right.
Perfect. And everybody, if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify today, you can head over to wholehorse.ca/episode-53. That will take you to this episode that you're listening to. And you can, if you scroll down the page, you'll see all the resources included there that we've talked about today. So that's the way to access all of this. If you're looking for some further information or wanting to, just you've got some time on your hands with all that's going on right now, it's a perfect time to learn some of this stuff and educate yourself. So so you can check it out there. Awesome. Thank you so much for being on with me today, Tammy.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
It was fun. Absolutely. I really, really appreciated it. And we'll have to do this again sometime. We've got other things that we can chat about for sure.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thanks everybody for tuning in today and listening. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And we'll be back soon with another episode. Okay. Bye for now. I wanted to share a little of what I'm up to and my offerings right now, especially in this challenging time. On Wednesday mornings, 9:30 Pacific, I'm offering a free remote session to clients, community, podcast listeners, and beyond, and would love to see you there. It's a 45-minute session, and we go into a lot of the things we talk about in the podcast, and you also get to experience my energy medicine work, which is pretty exciting. I've included the link down below at wholehorse.ca under the episode that you're watching. As well, I offer remote sessions for you and your horses and the rest of your herd. They're energy medicine sessions. They're very powerful. And I've been doing remote sessions for, almost 15 years now. And I absolutely love them. I find them so effective. So if that's something you're wanting to try, you can always email me at alexa@alexalinton.com to set up a session.